It is no secret that the M2 MacBooks are quite disappointing. They simply didn't meet the expectations of the general audience, and I don't know about you, but I was expecting the same stuff we got with the M1 chips, but more of that. And what I and many people got, well, that was something else. We got a slow SSD, hotter chips, minuscule performance boost visible only in synthetic benchmarks, and almost no significant quality of life improvements to the devices themselves. The M2 chip is not a worthy successor to the M1, but the upcoming M3 chip, well, it most likely will be. In one of the latest Power On newsletters, Mark Gurman said that after the September event, Apple will host another one exclusively dedicated to new Macs with the M3 chips. And I know how many people are skeptical about the M3 coming out so soon, but I think that now is the perfect time for Apple to release it. Well, look, the M2 was a disappointment, and everyone knows that. Apple did that on purpose because the M2 Macs were never intended to be great. They always were a placeholder. Fill in the gap until the real deal comes out. The MacBook Airs, for example, were needed to test out the new design, see the public reception, and properly test out the M2 chip itself and the new cheaper SSD config. And it worked! Despite the latest Macs having a flaw of much slower SSD than before, people are still buying them. And while people do, Apple was hard at work making the M3 chips because M3 has always been planned as the big thing. The M3 will be the first Mac chip featuring a 3nm technology, which will make Apple the first company to adopt this design. This jump to 3nm is expected to bring 60 to 70% more logic density and 15% higher performance while consuming 30 to 35% less power. And that's with the same number, of course. And since we all know Apple, all the M3 series chips will get more CPU and GPU cores. Now, we don't yet know the full spec list, but Mark Gurman has shared some information about the Pro and Max versions of the M3 chip. So, according to Gurman, Apple is actively testing the M3 Pro chip with 12 CPU cores, 18 GPU cores, and 36 gigs of memory. The CPU layout is 6 high-performance cores and 6 energy-efficient cores, and this, aside from memory, is most likely the base configuration of the MacBook Pros. To put it into perspective, the M2 Pro has 10 CPU cores and 16 GPU cores in the base version, and as we've seen from the M2 series of chips, 2 extra CPU and GPU cores do make a difference. Base M2 Pro is around 20% faster than the base M1 Pro chip, and those two are manufactured using the same 5nm technology, and if we factor in all the rumored improvements, the base M3 Pro could be around 35% faster in both CPU and GPU department than the M2 Pro. As for the M3 Max, the rumored specs are absolutely crazy. 16 CPU cores and up to 40 GPU cores. And according to Bloomberg, Apple has been actively testing this chip paired with 48 gigabytes of memory. If you don't know the specs of current M2 Max, here's a little recap. 12 CPU cores and 38 GPU cores in the best version. And according to these leaked numbers, the M3 Max will have the same number of high-performance cores as the total number of cores the M2 Max has. Just think of the performance gains on this chip. I think it is safe to say that the CPU in M3 Max should be at least 55 to 60% more powerful, which is insane. The GPU gains are probably going to be more modest at around 30 to 35%, but don't forget that all those gains will consume less or the same amount of energy. So what will happen to the base M3 chip? Well, according to Gurman, Apple is already testing the Mac Mini with the M3 chip, and the testing units have 8 CPU cores and 10 GPU cores paired with 24 gigs of memory. And I know the numbers aren't as impressive as with the M2 Pro and M2 Max, M3 Pro, M3 Max, but if we apply the same logic of it being the base configuration of the chip, then we'll see that the number of CPU cores will be identical, but the base number of GPU cores will be the same as the unbinned M2 has now. The base M2 chip has 8 GPU cores per se, so the performance boost with the base M3 could be around 15 to 20% for the CPU and around 40% for the GPU, making the M3 around 30% more powerful than the M2. And again, all that while heating less and consuming less energy. The specs of the M3 series chips are really something to wait for, but what excites me more is the timeline and the products that we're gonna get. Remember that October event I mentioned earlier? Well, Mark Gurman believes that during that event, we will see the new MacBook Airs, new iMac, and a MacBook Pro, but Ming-Chi Kuo contradicts Gurman, stating that the M3 powered MacBook Pros won't get released earlier than the first quarter of 2024. I think that both of them are right. Gurman talks about the 13-inch MacBook Pro, while Kuo about 14-inch and 16-inch models. Yes, 13-inch MacBook Pro, Apple still sells that abomination. I don't know who buys them, but I hope it will get discontinued real soon because there is absolutely nothing good about that MacBook, and that's exactly why I don't want to talk about it. What I really want to see during that October event is the new iMac. Mark Gurman claims that Apple is already working on it. This new 24-inch iMac most likely will have the same design, which I always liked. Analysts say that even the color options will remain the same. To me, it makes perfect sense. The M1 iMac came out in 2021, and after 2 years, it still looks super modern with its flat sides and impressive thinness, and Apple has absolutely no reason to change this design after only 2 years. The only thing Apple could change is the method of attaching the stand to the monitor. Leakers don't give any clarifications on that, but I think we could get something like the Studio Display has, a VESA mount on the back. The display will surely be the same, and there is once again no need for change. The only big thing that's gonna change is the heart, the M3 chip instead of the M1. As for the MacBook Airs, I'm trying to be optimistic and cautious here. The 15-inch MacBook Air was released a few months ago, and releasing the M3 version seems odd to me. However, the 13-inch MacBook Air has been on sale for over a year now, which makes it a perfect candidate for receiving the M3 chip. Light, thin, and perfectly suited for such a chip, and given the improved thermals in the M3, the MacBook Air will most likely retain most of its power. But what if I'm wrong? What if the 15-inch MacBook Air with the M3 is already in the works? In fact, it is. Bloomberg has shared the code names for 6 M3 powered Macs, and these code names clearly show both the 13 and 15-inch MacBook Airs. That doesn't mean the 15-inch M3 MacBook Air will get unveiled in October, but could mean early January next year. Also, that list of code names also shows the M3 iMac and a 13-inch M3 MacBook Pro, so there's that. Anyway, you really might want to wait for the M3 MacBook Airs. There's only one M3 Mac left to discuss, the Mac Mini. I know there is also not much to talk about since it is already undergoing active testing by Apple. What I find interesting is that in January we got the M2 and M3 Pro Mac Mini. Oh, I'm sorry, M2 Pro Mac Mini. 2 versions in 1 year? What I find a more plausible scenario is the January keynote where this new Mac Mini will be unveiled. Because if Apple releases it in October, that will make people mad. October or January, what's the difference? I think that these release windows don't matter if you really want a new Mac. If you already have an Apple Silicon Mac, you can easily wait for a few more months. Just look, it's around 2 months until the October keynote where these Macs could get released, or it's 6 months until the January keynote. How bad could it be to wait, especially given the massive improvement the update will bring? I think you shouldn't buy any Mac right now. Wait a little and you'll get a far better computer. The M3 will be a huge deal, so I urge you to wait. It will be worth it. And thank you for watching, guys. See you in the next one.